What's going on, everybody? This video is from Tineforth. He is four-tabling NL5 on stars. And it looks like we don't really have very many hands on anybody ahead of time. On a site like Stars with so many zillions of people, and at this level, usually you're just going to run into like random unknowns, different people every time you play. But it does allow you to play a fun game of guess who the fish is based on their avatars. Like right now, I'm looking at the lower right, this guy Nudist777. Like anyone that has a picture of themselves as an avatar is like almost always a huge fish. If they're wearing sunglasses, double that. If they're wearing sunglasses and a turtleneck, double that again. And if it looks like they had the picture taken at a Walmart photo studio, like, I mean, there's just like, there's no chance this guy isn't like the hugest idiot ever. I shouldn't say stuff like that because it'll probably turn out that it's a some actor from a some super popular movie or something that anybody that doesn't live in a cave would know, and then I'll just end up looking ridiculous. But hopefully that won't be the case. Okay, in the upper left we open Jack 9 on the button and get called by a tight guy that we only have a few hands on. It's definitely a value bet on the flop. The flop hits so many hands, but we're ahead of the majority of them because a lot of them are like King Queen, Queen Jack, King Jack, stuff that's like over cards in a straight draw, flush draws. The turn is a good card for us. Tens are already ahead of us anyway, but we're still ahead of all those other things. The river is terrible for us just because it hits a bunch of those hands I just mentioned, like King Jack, King Queen, Queen Jack. So even if he is some donk, which he isn't, because it looks like Tineforth, like, look to see how many tables he's playing, and he's playing a bunch. But like, even if he was a donk, like the card is so bad for us that we should just fold there anyway. Even though sometimes the guy could have some misflush drawn bet out there, usually he's just going to have a straight or a king or something. I wouldn't fold the 10-8 suited from the cutoff on table one. Both the guys behind you are kind of tight, and that's really, this should probably be like, you should need a reason not to open it from the cutoff as opposed to need a reason to open it. But at the same time, like, and especially when you're getting started, like, being a little nitty definitely like costs you much less than making unprofitable calls and being kind of spewy. Okay, and on table one, again, like we have this guy behind us. We don't know much about him. He's like a 26-17, something like that. Not overly ridiculously loose. And we're on a small blind with a 9-10 offsuit, a hand to go. You can open that profitably against just about anybody. Like, even if they're kind of a colly-woolly fish, like that has enough high card juice that you're going to be able to value bet a decent amount of times post flop, and it hits a decent amount of flops, and they're going to fold sometimes. So against almost anybody, that's going to be a profitable open. And it should probably, against a lot of guys, be kind of towards the bottom of your opening range, but still. Okay, I'm going to pause it for a second here, because this is kind of a common situation that I think people have problems with sometimes. In the lower left, we flop a decent but not great draw. We have a 9 high flush draw and a 4-way pot. The biggest thing I look for in situations like this is what our position is. Like, if we bet, how likely are we to gain something from that? And what I mean by that is, like, if we could increase our chances of being in position on the turn to where we could take a free card sometimes, then the value of betting goes up quite a bit, and we could bet even if it doesn't work as a bluff as much, because we'd get to see 2 cards instead of 1 a lot of the time. In this case, 2 guys have position on us. It's kind of, it's not like the driest or the wettest board ever. It's a pretty average board. But with 3 guys in the pot, 2 of them in position on us, like, they're never all folding. And usually we're getting called by someone that has position on us. So on the turn, we're not going to be able to just like check and get to the river. There's going to be somebody that gets to act behind us. So I like to check there and evaluate based on what happens. Just because when you don't have fold equity and you're not really gaining last position by betting, you're usually just kind of like throwing out money behind, which you don't have to do just because you have a flush draw. You can check and see what happens. Sometimes a guy will bet small and everybody will call, and it'll be like the easiest, most profitable call in the world ever. Sometimes it'll check to the button, who will be a really aggressive guy, and maybe he'll bet and you'll check raise and everybody will fold. You just look at the situation when it happens. But for now, I don't think there's a whole ton of merit to betting there. Okay, so it checks around on the flop, and the board kind of like, makes the board even much more coordinated, ties a ton of hands together. Even though nobody showed interest on the flop, like, you definitely can't bet there because it just it hooks up with so many hands. A guy bets 10 cents. You're probably going to be able to call that profitably, even though you get about 3 to 1. Plus you'll get a little bit more on the river the times you do hit on average. so calling there fine. Here with the ace-3 suited versus this guy who's like kind of a tight regular, he's playing 4 players, like, or 4 tables. I think he's opening wide enough there, and he's going to be kind of aggressive post flop. Like, I don't really like calling there. It's close. I mean, you're in position, you get a decent price. You know, it's not the worst hand ever as far as like hitting flops. But I think in this case, I'd probably rather just 3-bet there. Like, I think this guy's probably going to be, just based on what you know about him, he's 4-tabling, probably a regular tight aggressive guy. Like, you block a lot of the stuff he continues with. He's probably folding a bunch to 3-bets there. And when you do get called, it's not like you have a worthless hand. So I kind of like 3-betting there in that situation more than calling. You know, I'd rather call if I had an ace-9 suited, I'd much rather call just because it plays a lot better after the flop. But calling isn't the worst thing ever. Okay, and we get bet into on an ace-high flop. He pots it. I'm still calling, but on this turn, like, it's... Stop again here. You know that he's likely... I mean, he might not be the greatest player ever, but he's definitely not like a total fish, just based on what we know already. So, bluffing here would be super bad, because usually when we call on the flop, we're either going to have an ace, some kind of draw, whatever, and the most obvious draw comes in on the turn. Nobody ever folds top pair, you know, so I wouldn't expect him to be bluffing there too often. It wouldn't make a lot of sense, so I think we can just fold our ace-3 there because it's basically a bluff catcher in this situation, and there's not much reason to think that this guy's bluffing. And looking down on the bottom right, our man nudist 777 is 73.9 at this point. So I win at the guess the fish game. It's a pretty fun game, by the way. Like, oh, I have to. Okay, now this is kind of strange considering some of the other pretty nitty open folds that we made. We're opening a 7-5 offsuit on the button, which can be okay in certain circumstances. You know, anything can be okay, sometimes opening the button. But in this case, you've got a guy on the big blind that is 87-13. So this really isn't the time to... I mean, he's bad, but you don't want to be opening a 7 high on a button versus a guy that's guaranteed to call. You know, it's just too junky of a hand. You know, a king 7 would be great. 7-5, not so much. Or I guess it's actually the small blind that is 87-13, but it doesn't make any difference. It's still, I wouldn't open. And then he min-donks into us, and our hand is so bad that we have to fold, getting like 9-1. Oh, but what I was going to say is with the identify a fish game, not only the self-portraits, but other things you would look for is anything with a motor, like monster trucks and dirt bikes, any picture of a baby. Those are always good too. Those are the big ones. Self-portraits, baby, and stuff with a motor. Here with the jacks, a tight guy opens from the cutoff. We don't have very many hands on him. We've got 59 hands on him, and so far he is 12-12. So we know that he's probably kind of like nitty taggy or whatever, but I still like the 3-bet with jacks just because at these levels, and at really any level that I've seen, like just assume that if you don't know how a person reacts to 3-bets, you should, unless you have evidence to indicate otherwise, just assume that people will call you, and that they'll call you with hands that they shouldn't. Like, they'll set mine when it's not profitable to set mine. They'll call with stuff that's too weak versus what your range is likely to be. Now, if you find out later that this guy plays really tight against 3-bets, then I might not 3-bet him with a hand like jacks, because it wouldn't play very good versus, like if he's only continuing with super strong hands and our jacks don't do so good. But if you don't know, I'm going to err on the side of value, especially at these limits, just because, on average, people they're gonna make it a value bet by making bad calls. But if the guy 4-bet me, like, I'm still throwing it away, and I don't feel bad about 3-betting a value hand and then folding it when I think that somebody is going to call me a lot. Okay. Here in the bottom left hand, we just folded a queen jack in middle position, which is, it's somewhat standard. I think for most people, when they're in middle position, like if you didn't know anybody at the table, like if they were all unknowns, that a queen jack is either going to be in the bottom of their opening range or the top of their folding range. So, it's kind of borderline, not that great of a hand, no big deal to fold it. But in this case, we've got that same guy that I was talking about before when we raised the blind. You got this guy behind us that is 88-12, and granted, he has position on us, but we have a hand that has a lot of value against a player like that. When you have a queen jack, that dominates a ton of hands that a guy that plays 4 out of 5 hands plays with. So while the profitability of a lot of hands that don't hit as many flops or don't have high pair power and that need to bluff a little bit, like, those go way down against this guy. With the queen jack, you can definitely profitably raise there, because it's going to be like printing money the times you hit top pair with this guy behind you that's calling you with, just random, queen 4 type stuff. All right, and not that you even have to dominate him. Like, obviously, he's also going to, somebody that plays that bad before the flop is usually going to play pretty bad after the flop too. So even with the positional disadvantage, we should still be playing hands like that have that much ability to make a top pair. I noticed that, like, he doesn't have a Tineforth, that is the poster of this video. It doesn't have auto muck on. Like, I don't know, maybe this isn't the computer that he usually plays on. But I would say, like, definitely worth the trouble to take a few minutes, set up the auto muck, set up a few betting keys so that you don't always have to, like, click the bet size around for the pre-flop raises and stuff like that. Like, if you watched any of the other videos that I've done so far, like, you shouldn't take for granted the star software. Like, if the too much money on the table Everleaf guy saw this, like, he would probably be angry that you're not setting up these buttons. Same with the on-game guide. Like, I could hardly even watch that software. I don't know. It was very tilting. Okay, there with the Jack 9 suited, you got this guy who's basically like unknown taggy guy on the button. You have no idea how he reacts to 3-bets, so I think folding there is just fine. And hold up there a second. In this lower left hand, we had this guy who's 71-0 that limped in on the cutoff, and we had a Jack-9 offsuit in the small blind. In that case, what I do depends a lot on the big blind. I like your play in that case because you've got this 90 VPIP guy behind you, so quite often you're raising there, and you're just going to end up out of position versus two players. But if we had a tighter guy behind us, like a regular nitty guy or whatever, that's going to usually be folding. I think raising there so that the big blind wouldn't free roll us. We're going to take his blind a lot, and then we're going to end up heads up with a position or with a hand that, like I say, it can make some top pairs. It plays okay versus a 70 VPIP guy even out of position. So if that guy had been tighter, I probably would have raised it up, but I like to fold otherwise. Especially with this guy that just plays like every single hand. And on the lower left, we isolate a limper with Queen-9 offsuit, which is good. Like I say, it's the same guy, 73-0, who's playing a ton of hands. Our hand plays very well. We hit top pair on the flop, and pretty straightforward value bet. There was the threes. That guy has like 40 blinds, so that's just a fold. There are no good flops for threes other than when you hit a three, almost. So you're basically missing and unable to call on most flops unless you have some sort of like a good post flop read on someone that you're going to be able to take a lot of pots away from them or whatever. So when he only has 40 blinds, like the fact that you miss a bunch of flops isn't compensated for by winning a huge pot when you hit a set, because he can't even make half of a huge pot with his stack. I like check folding there with the ace-8 on that mono board, by the way. You're just going to get called there too much. Here on the lower right, we get called by this guy. Hold on, I'm going to pause it for a second here. We have 5 hands on the guy. He is 6750. So pretty loose. And we do have the stats here somewhere. I hadn't been bringing them up because most of these guys we didn't have many hands on anyway. But, okay, his call C-bet is 100%, his fold to C-bet is 0. But we have 5 hands on him, so that's just like probably one hand. I guess it might be 2. But in any case, the guy's playing 2/3 of his hands. The board comes 10-2-2. you know, even if he's a loose, fishy guy that's gonna call with ace high here, like he's still folding most of his range. Like he usually just has nothing. So unless you have a reason to believe that, you know, he's just some berserko maniac that's gonna check raise you a ton with air there, like I would still bet on the flop. You know, and once you have more hands on him, you know, you might change your mind about that. But for now, you don't have enough information to not make what would normally be like a very, very easy c-bet. And we stab on the turn, which I think is fine. He did check flop, check turn. He's still usually not going to have anything. And then, you know, probably just giving up river after that. And he had top pair, which is, you know, the top of his range there. So, well, not the top, but obviously we wouldn't expect him to normally have that good of a hand. Okay, upper left-hand table. We isolate a guy with a king-queen. He limped under the gun and we raise, he called. The flop comes ace-queen, 9 diamond, and we check back. I don't like that check. Like, I understand that we have kind of a medium strength hand, but it's, well, here, I'll compare it to a similar situation so we can see the difference. If instead of the 9 of diamonds, it was the 5 of clubs and the board was ace, queen, 5 rainbow, then checking back has a lot of merit, because when we're ahead, like if he just has some random air, a small pair, or whatever, the times we're ahead, we're usually way ahead. So it's not like we're shipping him a bunch of equity by checking behind there. So he's, you know, it's not like a 6-out free roll. Usually he's going to have like 2 or maybe 0 outs. So we're not giving him a lot of equity in that scenario by checking back. And also there aren't a ton of worse hands he can call with. He can call with a queen, you know, he can call with like queen 10 and stuff like that. But they're not really, you know, no flush draw, not a lot of straight draws, you know, just a couple of gut shots that he might not call with. So on that board, like, you gain more from random bluffs, like random stuff that he might start betting with on the turn, then you lose by not betting the flop, because the hands you're ahead of, you can still get the same amount of value from later in the hand, and you're not shipping any equity or bluffing equity to hands that we're ahead of. So in that case, I kind of like checking back the flop. I might not always do it, but it would be a pretty reasonable choice. Being though it's not the 5 of clubs, that it's a 9 of diamonds, that changes things a ton, because now there's flush draws. There's a lot of different, like he might call you with a hand like, I mean, he's definitely calling with Jack 10. He could call with stuff like King Jack. You know, there are a ton of like different gut shots, pairs. Like there's even more, you know, something like a 10-9 is still, you're still gonna be a lot more hands like that than in the first example. Like he could still call there just because his pair would be higher than it would be with a 5, plus he would have like some sort of, you know, backdoor straight draw or whatever. So in this case, not only do you, you know, there's more worse hands that call you, and you know, his hands that are behind have better equity against us. So in this case, you're just kind of missing value by not betting there. Okay, and he checks the turn, and we bet there, which is pretty normal. And the river is a jack, which is kind of interesting. Now, a lot of the hands that had some kind of straight draw, like it'll add a pair to them. It does bring King 10 in, so that makes a straight. But he could also have, you know, we don't know, the guy could be a fish. He could add stuff like King Jack. He wouldn't have to be a fish to call with Jack 10. You know, there are a lot of different things. Like, he hardly ever has a real good hand here. I mean, he could have an ace that he slow played, but that's not usually going to happen. So I think that even though, like, your hand doesn't feel very strong, like, I think you're going to get called, you're going to be ahead of the range that calls you here. You know, he can have a couple of horse queen, he can have stuff that was a straight draw and has a jack in it. So I would definitely bet something there, and obviously we'd be instantly folding no raise. But I think you are going to be ahead of what calls you there if, you know, like if you opened up Poker Stove and put on all the different things you could have and try to figure out how likely is to call with different stuff. I'm pretty sure that it would be a value bet if you know, bet half pot or something on the river. And we check, and it turns out he has Jack 10, which, whatever, you never know exactly what somebody's going to have. But he may or may not have called with that. We don't know. On the right, unraised pot, we bet with our 10-4 after this guy checks, which is fine. The turn, it's not the greatest card ever since it brings 5-6 in, but I still think that, I don't know, that's close. A lot of times those limped hands are pretty weird. Like, I might bet there on the turn just because, you know, he could just have some, you know, just something super weak, a worse pair or a gut shot draw or something. Like, usually he's just going to bet on the flop if he has an ace. So, you know, the 7 really isn't highly relevant other than it brings in 5-6. I don't really mind the check just because our hand is so marginal and it's hard to, you know, tell. You know, it's hard for him to just check call the flop with some random Jack 10 or whatever. But I might throw another bet in there on the turn. Just like when in doubt, like people will surprise you with the weird stuff they fall with. With the Jack 7 suited on the lower left table a second ago, back her up for a second, get the table out of the way. Oops. Yeah, this 81-0 guy, I mean it's 21 hands, but he's 81-0. He limps in middle position. Okay, there we go. We have a Jack 7 suited on the button. That's a very easy isolate range raise. Even though like we have a guy behind us that's also very fishy and will call a lot. Like, our hand doesn't play the worst multi-way. And you're just going to be in position with bad players that have random hands. Like, you know, you can definitely play that profitably there. I mean, even over limping is probably profitable there. I would rather raise than over limp, but like, I'm definitely not folding there against guys that are just flailing around with random hands when we have the button. I just noticed in the Stars note that it has a label for short stacker. You wouldn't think that you would really need a label for that. You would think that their short stack would usually be a pretty, you know, high success rate indicator of that. Anyway, we raised the king-queen suited on a button. We get called by a guy that's been pretty tight so far. The board is completely blank, completely dry. The pot is very big relative to stack sizes, so obviously we won't need to bet very big on this flop. And he bets, yeah, a little over half. I think that's a pretty good bet size. It's not going to change his ranges a lot, so we might as well get a good price for ourselves. Upper right hand, we raise the cutoff with an ace-4 offsuit, which, you know, is pretty loose. Like, I normally wouldn't open that other than a real favorable circumstance. In this case, we do have a guy on the big blind that's played 8 hands in this 50-0 so far. So he's been kind of fishy, which, you know, makes it a lot better than if there were unknowns. But it seems strange to me given some of our other hands selection. I don't hate it though, just because of that reason. I hope that is the reason that it was raised. Of course, maybe we just thought we were on the button and didn't realize we were in the cutoff too. Okay, anyway, and in the lower left, we isolated this huge fish. He's 83-0. We've got a jack-9 suited. We felt kind of a medium strength hand, but that's still very easy value bet. There are definitely lots of like gut shots, flush draws, and even worse pairs that he can call with here. I mean, it's always easier to value bet against guys that, you know, like against a lot of guys, like it's pretty hard for them to have a worse second pair. But against a guy that you know, is playing Jack 4, you know, the guy that's playing like every hand, it's pretty easy to have a better second pair. And he donks into us for almost full pot. And I like to fold, even though we have something. You can't just make these like hapless calls against guys when you have no idea like how often they're going to keep betting. Upper left, we raise ace queen. We get called by this fishy looking guy. We only have 10 hands on him. He's kind of short stacked. He's 50-10 so far, and he calls our flop bet. And makes this little mini donk into us on the turn, which is kind of tilting. He's only betting 18 cents in the 85. The thing about this situation is, guys that do this, and they'll do it on the flop a lot too. You know, these fishy kind of stationing guys. You know, when it's their turn, they'll just like you know, make these little donk bets or whatever. Usually the range is quite marginal. You know, it's usually stuff that like they have a little something, but the thing of it is, at the same time, they'll still usually station the crap out of you with that range if you raise them. So a lot of times, like in these similar situations to this, and a lot of times it happens on the flop too, like your range there should just be like, the value part of it should be wider than normal, and you just shouldn't bluff there a lot. Even though sometimes it sucks because you'll just be sitting there with like a jack high or something, and it's like, well, I can't fold to that, but I can't call that. Well, don't fall into the trap of just raising because you're tilted by a small bet. In this case, we actually have, you know, I wouldn't really call it a value raise if we raise here, but it definitely has a lot more equity than, you know, like a jack high. In this case, I would actually just call though. You know, you get really big odds. Some of the time you're ahead and we'll be able to show down unimproved. But I just think if you raise, like I think you're behind his marginal range here, and I think he's just going to station you a ton. So I really don't like raising there, even though his bet looks, you know, quote, weak. He will fold some of the time, but overall, you know, these guys doing this kind of stuff just don't fold a lot. So I'm not a big fan of it. Okay, here on the upper left, versus this fishy guy we just played the hand with, we have a 6-5, which is just a 6 high, obviously not a lot of showdown value. He checks to us. It's unlikely that he's hit this board. We have a gut shot and 2 overcards, so even though the guy is like kind of fishy collie, like you have enough equity that you should definitely be betting it. Especially considering the fact that it's very, it's basically impossible for us to win at showdown unimproved. And we bet the turn and we get called and we make a 6-high flush draw, which is like only the 4 of clubs is the worst flush. So even against a fishy guy like this, I'm just going to go ahead and check the river. Okay, we're a little over 40 minutes now, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this puppy up. I would say the biggest thing that jumped out at me in this video is, there were some pre-flop spots where we could have probably played profitably and we didn't. But like I say, it's NL5. There's no harm when you're getting started being kind of nitty. But there are definitely some spots post-flop where we should have been value betting and we weren't. And that's just going to make a huge difference for a long time to come. And I would say that's probably like one of the most common leaks for micro stakes regs is they're not very good at making kind of thinner value bets. They don't want to get raised, or they're worried that they're only going to get called by better hands. You just have to get good at thinking about everything that people are going to call you with, and don't give them too much credit. Like, fish are going to be fish, and they're going to call you with a lot of stuff. So, if it's close and you have a tendency to be kind of nitty and passive, then it's probably a bet. So just try to think that way when you're playing, and you'll get better in that area over time. Alright, hope you guys liked the video. If you'd like to have your own poker video reviewed for free, check out the upload tab on my Facebook fan page. If you're interested in personal coaching or have suggestions for future content for the site, email me at opensourcepoker@gmail.com.